more people are falling behind on their car payments, and when that happens, lenders can step in and repossess those vehicles. Experts say it's not necessarily a sign of economic collapse, but it's definitely a warning sign that the economy is slowing down.
Oh, hey, that's right. We're leaving Donut.
Up until recently, when we were told we weren't allowed to work on any more cars. No buying, no restoring, no nothing.
In fact, it wasn't canceled. I quit.
There's a number I want you to sit with for a second. $257,000. That's what this car YouTuber spent on repairs, insurance, towing, and ownership costs in a single year. Not on buying cars, just on keeping them running. And that did not even include his biggest bill, which he said could push close to another $100,000 on its own.
So about a month has gone by since I walked through and said goodbye to all of those cars, and in the meantime, I had a guess on how much taxes that I owed, and it turned out I guessed very, very wrong. I owe about double what I thought, over $500,000. So I'm gonna have to sell a lot more cars and have sold a lot more cars.
Now think about how car YouTube actually works. Someone buys something insane, the thumbnail looks like a lottery ticket, you click, and for a few minutes, it genuinely feels like these people figured out how to print money with a camera. The cars are real, the views are real, the sponsorships are real, so the money must be fine too, right? What nobody was really showing you was what happened after the camera stopped rolling. The $14,500 monthly lease payment. The parts the manufacturer flat out refused to sell. The repair quote that came back at $1.7 million on a single car. And audiences actually started picking up on this before the creators ever admitted it. Back in 2021, someone in a car forum basically mapped the whole formula out in one comment, the spec video, the reaction video, the maybe I will sell it video, then find the next car and repeat. At the time, it read like cynicism. Looking back, it reads more like someone who had watched enough of these channels to quietly see the pattern underneath. So this is not really a story about people going broke in the traditional sense. It is about what happens when the car becomes the brand requires the car, and the car starts costing more than anyone is willing to say on camera. Before we get into all of it, be sure to subscribe to the biggest car TV news on YouTube and click that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. The clearest example of all this playing out in real time is Tyler Hoover. His whole thing has always been buying cars that are cheap for a reason, the kind of purchases where you already know going in that something is probably wrong, and his own website basically jokes about that. The idea is that the deal is always too good to be true, and he buys it anyway. By the end of 2025, his running total for repairs, insurance, towing, and general ownership costs across his fleet had reached $257,399, and that number still did not include what he described as his biggest bill yet, a single project he said could push close to another $100,000 on its own.
Including car parts, maintenance, and repairs over the last year, and that number is, it's $175,881 with the Car Ninja, the Car Wizard, and well, detailers and auto parts like a 427 Corvette engine, almost $200,000 on auto repairs.
But the part that really illustrates how the trap works is actually his Bugatti Chiron situation, because that one was not even a money loser on paper. The videos around that car brought in about $77,500. That sounds fine until you remember he was also sitting on a $14,500 monthly lease and a looming service bill that made the whole thing feel genuinely precarious even while the content was performing. So the videos were working and the car was still quietly becoming a problem. That is the part that does not get talked about enough.
I'm not counting the purchase price of these cars either. That's just repairing them, maintaining them, cleaning them. That's how much it's cost.
Success on camera and financial stress off camera are not mutually exclusive. They can exist at the exact same time. What Hoover actually said after all of this is probably the most honest thing to come out of that whole year. He pointed out that buying cheap project cars and worn-out performance cars often ends up costing more than just buying a better example from the start. Which sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but the entire format of his channel, and honestly a lot of car YouTube in general, is built on the idea that the deal justifies the risk. What 2025 showed is that the deals were adding up in ways that the individual videos never really captured. It was not one disaster car that broke the math. It was tows and insurance and repeated fixes and bargain purchases that each seemed manageable on their own until suddenly the total was sitting at $250,000 and climbing. Then there is Matt Armstrong, and his situation takes everything the Hoover story established and pushes it into completely different territory.
If you guys don't know, yes, the Bugatti has been crashed.
On that chassis number of vehicle, they will not supply any component through a Bugatti dealership.
And if you want to repair that properly, you can't do that in a garage. There's just a few places in the world with the right equipment
and only a few people in the world with the right training to be able to do that.
Armstrong decided to rebuild a wrecked Bugatti Chiron Persport. The repair quote that came back was $1.7 million. The car's VIN had been locked, meaning no dealer would touch it or supply official parts. What started as a rebuild video turned into a months-long public fight over who actually gets to control a multi-million-dollar machine once an insurance company writes it off. And Armstrong just kept going, which is the most revealing part of the whole thing. By April 2026, this project was being described as one of the biggest automotive controversies in recent memory. And viewers were still deep in it with him, closely watching the footage, flagging what they thought might be problems in the repairs, following every new update as it came out. The audience was not just watching at that point, they were more like a live jury that had been sitting on the case for months. And that dynamic tells you something about where this genre has ended up. Once a creator gets far enough into a rebuild like this, the car stops being a car in any normal sense. It becomes a weekly cliffhanger that the audience feels personally invested in, which means the creator now has a very strong pull to keep going regardless of what the off-camera reality actually looks like. Because stopping feels like letting everyone down, and the further in you get, the harder stopping becomes anyway. The sunk cost is financial, but it is also social. And honestly, the social part might be the harder one to walk away from. Rich Benoit's version of this story looks different on the surface, but it is pointing at the same wall from a different angle. He bought a flood, damaged Tesla for $14,000, which already sounds like a classic car YouTube setup. Then he called Tesla for parts, and they told him no, because he was not an authorized repairer. That single phone call basically became the foundation of his entire public identity.
I have a P85. I need those little lug nut covers.
What do you need those? Why?
Sorry, hold on 1 second, hold on.
He turned the fight into content, built an audience around it, and ended up connected to a much larger argument about who is actually allowed to fix modern high-end cars.
At this point, I would consider myself the Dr. Frankenstein of Teslas. If you own something, if you purchase something free and clear, then you should be able to fix it yourself.
By June 2024, a federal judge allowed Tesla owners to pursue a class action claiming the company had monopolized its own repair and parts ecosystem in ways that forced customers into higher prices and longer waits. What Benoit's story adds to all of this is that the problem is no longer just about whether you can afford the repair bill. Increasingly, it is about whether you are even allowed to attempt the repair at all. The manufacturer can simply decide you are not authorized, and that is the end of it. For a content creator whose whole channel depends on getting into these cars and fixing them on camera, that is a completely different kind of wall to run into. This is probably a good moment to look at what the more stable side of this space actually looks like, because not every flashy channel is quietly hemorrhaging money. The difference usually has nothing to do with the cars themselves. Tim Burton is a useful contrast here because his operation is openly built around a lot more than YouTube views. Freelance media work, consultancy, sourcing, multiple ventures, a proper team, a long list of partners and sponsors. The cars are still part of the brand, but they are being carried by a broader commercial structure underneath them rather than the other way around. The garage looks the same from the outside, but what is behind it is completely different. And in this space, that distinction is basically everything.
So my car, as per the spec video I did back at the time, and I've owned it now for a couple of months shy of 4 years, but it cost me £465,000. That felt like a bargain, and decent mileage with it, the best part of 10,000. It would hit the market for something like 265. So down about £200,000 from new, which is horrific.
Nobody figured any of this out from one big revelation. There was no leaked document, no single confession that blew the whole thing open. It was more that enough story beats kept repeating until the pattern became impossible to ignore. The content started feeling cyclical in a way audiences could describe before the creators ever acknowledged it. Then Hoover started publishing his annual ownership totals. Armstrong turned a blocked supercar rebuild into a months-long public fight. Benoit explained how a salvaged Tesla pushed him into a right-to-repair lawsuit. Once the creators themselves started narrating the financial strain out loud, what had previously sounded like audience cynicism started sounding a lot more like pattern recognition. But there was a second way the pattern surfaced, and this one had nothing to do with repair bills. It was about the people who were not personally drowning in costs, but were still feeling trapped by the format itself. Alex Kirsten announced he had left Throttle. Jeremiah Burton and James Pumphrey made their exits from Donut Media and launched their own channels. A prominent departure video came out of Hoonigan. The actual video titles made it pretty plain. Several of these happened within a fairly short window of each other, which made it hard to write off as coincidence. When people started looking at those exits together, what came through from former and current insiders was a pretty consistent picture. experimental ideas giving way to pressure for obvious hits, creators feeling increasingly boxed into whatever the algorithm already rewarded, growth expectations that kept climbing past what was realistic, the creative range getting narrower the bigger the channel got. So what you actually end up with here are two versions of the same trap running in parallel. One is personal, the repair bills and the lease payments and the parts manufacturers who will not pick up the phone. The other is structural, a media environment that keeps rewarding the loudest and most expensive looking version of itself until the people inside it start looking for the exit. The audience has changed too. After Hoover revealed his ownership costs, viewers started joking that the next video would be, "I spent $400,000 fixing cars and I'm done." Others argued that influencer culture had pushed car enthusiasm into something normal people could not even relate to anymore. What once felt aspirational now feels distant. The same thing happened around Hoonigan when fans began calling the channel too corporate. And when creators started leaving places like Donut and Throttle, the same complaint kept coming up. They felt trapped by the algorithm and locked into repeating the same formula forever. Even the way audiences watch has changed. During Matt Armstrong's Bugatti rebuild, viewers were inspecting footage frame by frame, pointing out possible cracks, and warning him in the comments. At that point, the audience stops feeling like spectators. It starts feeling like a live audit, and that is where car YouTube sits now. The rewards are bigger than ever, but so is the pressure, because the lifestyle only works as long as the camera keeps making it look sustainable. Most creators do not collapse overnight. They slowly get buried under repair bills, lease payments, blocked parts, and the pressure to constantly outdo the last video. Some survive because there is a real business underneath the content, some walk away, and some hit the wall hard enough for the entire internet to watch it happen. The point was never that every car YouTuber is secretly broke. It is that visible wealth on camera is a lot more fragile than it looks, and the people who seem the most untouchable are often carrying the most they are not showing you. Tuna, no Crust, signing off.